Hello everyone, welcome back to Dan's Astrology. My name is Dan. Today is Sunday, the 25th of May, and today what I'm going to be doing is a video for the upcoming new moon in Gemini, which is happening a couple days from now on Tuesday. Now, a couple of things to consider about this is that as I'm recording this video, Mercury has just recently gone through a conjunction with Uranus and is hanging out at the end of Taurus, but at the point in which this new moon takes place, Mercury will have ingressed into Gemini, which is the sign of Mercury's domicile, meaning that Mercury is especially well dignified here because it's the home sign, and also sharing the sign with Mercury and the new moon, we have Jupiter at 27 degrees Gemini. And what I find particularly interesting about this new moon is that by the time we've got this period of 2 weeks from the new moon to the full moon where we will have Mercury and Jupiter both in Gemini, and then around the time of the full moon both of these planets will have conjoined and both of these planets will have ingressed together into Cancer. Okay? And this is particularly interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, because the planet Jupiter is in its detriment in Gemini, because Jupiter's home signs are Pisces and Sagittarius, and Sag is the opposite sign to Gemini, meaning that when Jupiter is in the opposite sign, it doesn't do very well. Okay? But however, Cancer is the place of Jupiter's exaltation. So within 2 weeks, we're going to be going through a dramatic change where Jupiter is going to go from a poorly dignified position to a very well dignified position. However, that's not the whole story, because at the same time, what we also have is this Saturn ingress into Aries, and at the very beginning, where we'll meet up with Neptune. And because Aries is a cardinal sign, this means that when Jupiter and Mercury ingress into Cancer, they will both be in a square to Saturn and Neptune in Aries. And if we apply Hellenistic astrology techniques, the Saturn and Neptune are in the overcoming position. This means that Jupiter will... But this is interesting because Jupiter will be afflicted by the square from Saturn and Neptune. In Hellenistic astrology, this was what they would call decimating, which is similar to the idea of having a tax placed on the planet, right? So that the planet is in a position where Jupiter is a planet of benevolence, of abundance, all that kind of stuff. But when it has this square to Saturn and Neptune, it will be decimated, basically. It would be like having a 10% tax put on what Jupiter is able to do for you, basically, right? But this is at least, I think this is at least better than having Jupiter in Gemini, but it does raise a question, basically, that I think there's a certain tendency when people are using astrology to predict what's going on in the world or what's going on in life, because Jupiter is the greater benefic, to count on Jupiter to provide all kinds of gains and opportunities for growth and stuff like that. But what I find interesting is quite often it seems to be that well-dignified Jupiter does not benefit the economy in such a way, or benefit maybe investment or financial gains in such a way. Because I think if you understand that the relationship of, or particularly Jupiter and Cancer, you've got this sign that's all about parents and mothers and nurturing, and, this idea of like the baby as this sort of like central focus of the parental attention, and the idea that there might be a lot of expenditure going on, basically, right? And I think it's kind of interesting to consider that if you look at the USA Sibley chart, which I'm not going to put on the screen or anything, but I'm just going to pull it up here for my own reference. America has the sun in Cancer, and hold on, wait a minute. I got the wrong one. yeah, the Sun in Cancer, Jupiter in Cancer, Venus in Cancer, and Mercury in Cancer, which means we are very close to America, USA, having its Jupiter return. And I think there's a certain theme to all this where obviously Jupiter stands for things like law, for the rule of law, for the kind of providence, or the idea that you're following a kind of higher order, or like a higher principles behind your actions, but you're also generous and you have goodwill and all this kind of stuff. And to me, it seems like what we've been going through with the recent politics in the United States, all the cuts to DEI and all this kind of stuff, is a kind of, rather than an abundancy mentality, more of a scarcity mentality, or the sense that America can't afford to be like the world police force. America can't afford to send aid to different. I mean, to get into the nitty gritty, I know that it's a complicated situation because some people may actually. I'm not here to be a political pundit, basically, right? But there's some basic thing going on with all of this, in that there's a question of, like, what is wealth in any ways, right? What is abundance? Is it having a lot of money in the bank so that if something happens, you don't have to worry about it because you just have this fat stack of cash just sitting there for when you need it? Or is abundance taking that cash and actually putting it to good use so that the needy people who need the money or need stuff the most are getting it, right? And that I think from a Jupiter perspective, to treat the archetype of Jupiter, going from, like, Jupiter in Gemini could feel overwhelmed by the multiplicity, right? This is like, think about if you're like a parent and your job as a parent is limited by the sake that you have one child to look after, and that it seems overwhelming because the baby's always crying and the baby's demanding and the baby's up in the middle of the night, but you're at least simplified. Your task as a parent is simplified in the sense that you at least you have this one job to do well, right? Whereas with Gemini, it could be like you feel overwhelmed because not only do you have to take care of your own child, you have to take care of every other child in the neighborhood, and the people who don't have enough money to send for their kid to buy lunch money, you're paying for that, and people are asking you for like, it's like at that point in time you may just be like, I can't think about anything. My job as a parent, I need to focus. I should be able to focus more attention on my own child, but my attention is just being diverted into every which way, and it's too complicated. I need to simplify, right? So could be this kind of sense of, like, the Jupiter in Gemini feeling kind of overwhelmed and exhausted, and there being too much. But then when you get to Jupiter exalted in Cancer, it could be more of like the idea of a singular focus on one child who receives all of your undivided attention. But then there's this kind of idea that this is also the peak in its own way, right? There's this idea of the reason why Jupiter is exalted in this position is because it's in the more geocentric perspective of solstice and equinox, it's the place of the most light, right? So there's this kind of thing that, like, after reaching that peak, it's only downhill from there, right? Then it becomes a defensive position to secure against loss and all this kind of stuff, which isn't really. I think there's something about Jupiter, which Jupiter is bountiful enough that Jupiter doesn't really care about loss and scarcity, because the whole dynamic of loss and scarcity comes from it's not really an archetypal perspective in a way, right? In the sense that, like, even if you look at, like, Saturn, the old age, there may be a loss of function of, like, maybe once you're older, you don't have the same functional ability that you had when you were a young person, but you're not thinking about like, oh, now that I'm an old person, I can't afford to give anything because I now, when I was young, I used to do so much for myself. Now I have to like hire all these care aides and helpers, and I just don't have any money to contribute. Like the idea is from Saturn is that for the Saturnian person has less ability to agency or ability to act in their own life, but is now preparing for death. And in preparing for death, you have this knowledge of your own mortality. You have this understanding that you can't take it with you, basically, so that you are now planning for what's going to happen after your death, and that there's no real point in, like, what are you going to do? You're going to be like an Egyptian pharaoh, and you're going to like have all your prized possessions in your tomb or whatever for the afterlife. I don't think it's really like it's more reasonable to say that the Jupiter is kind of like, oh, wait a minute, I only have this one life to live, right? If you only have one life to live, and you only have these talents, these gifts, these abilities, or these resources, then you might what are you being stingy about, right? You might as well find a way to embrace a kind of the spirit of total expenditure. Because if you have any left over at the end, who's it going to go for? If you're dead, you're not going to be around to have a say. All the stuff that is considered to be yours is just going to be passed on to other people. So you need to. It becomes less about being stingy, just to give to your own child, but to give back to the whole universe, basically, right? And so I think that there's some kind of optimism to be had here, in the sense that Jupiter is going into a more generous, more abundant, more of a caring, more of a sensitive position. Although in the midst of this current political shit show, I don't know what that's going to mean. I mean, I don't like. There is this, there's this whole conversation around scarcity and abundance, and that I think that maybe. Maybe it's worth it, in a sense, to be one of these new age people who talk about, developing an abundance mentality over a scarcity mentality. If you look at the name of the decan rulers for Cancer, the first decan is Lord of Love, the second decan is Lord of Abundance, the third decan, goes Love, Abundance, and Luxury. Right? Once you start for love, maybe the singular focus of the parent and the child, or having this one, like being like, instead of having this multitude of things that are putting too many demands on me to keep track of, you narrow it down to this one thing that you love, and you're just going to be like, you know what, there's only one life to live, we're only here for this one existence, and so I'm not going to hold back, I'm going to be totally abundance with this one thing that I care about, and then that singular focus, love moves open into abundance and luxury and all this kind of stuff. But it's contrasted with the Saturn and Neptune thing in Aries. The first decan of Aries, of course, being dominion, which is a sense of lordship, right? What's interesting, in the Bible, the word Lord, as we would call God Lord, is also, another name for that is Dominus, right? It's the same word that we get dominator from. It's the same word that we get dominion from. There's a certain, with the Mars rulership of Aries, there's something a little bit more maybe aggressive, maybe a bit more militaristic, maybe a bit more hostile, but this idea that, it's like kind of like the Lion King, right? Where he says, all that you see, this is our dominion. This is what belongs to us, that we're responsible for, right? And so I think in that sense, with what's going on in the United States, is that there is, I think, some sort of this sense that they don't want the whole globe, the whole world, to be their dominion. They want to narrow their focus down to one area, one area where they can take proper responsibility for and do it right. Although I don't really know if anything that is going on right now. This is another thing about the politics, is that um, I honestly don't know if it's good for me to be paying too much attention to it. And I'm also not interested in being a political pundit, right? I'm interested in my intention for this astrology channel is to focus on making astrology videos, and it just so happens that this year is one of the more important astrological years with the transits that are going on, and that some of those, that degree of importance can be seen in the political transits, what's going on with the United States and all this kind of stuff. However, I am not, the only money that I make off this is by doing natal chart readings for people, which are typically not really that focused on politics anyways, right? So I don't know if it does me any good really to stress and fuss over having a good political understanding. For the sake of this channel, it may be better for me not to focus so much on the politics of things. But on the other hand, I think there's a kind of like a missed opportunity if I don't do that, right? So, and also to remind you that I'm Canadian, and a lot of the, I try to keep up with what's going on in at a certain point. I'm kind of like, I'm not the audience people are talking to, because there's some sort of thing about, I don't know. But I think this is, and one of the things that I was thinking about, I was trying to tease out with my videos about Saturn and Neptune, is that there's an idea of, what I'm trying to say about the dominion, the dominus, all this kind of stuff, and relating to the whole thing about boundary issues with Saturn and Neptune, relating to the problem of the threats to make Canada the 51st state and all this kind of stuff, is that we, at least as a Canadian citizen, having this idea of our own country, our own sovereignty, our own responsibilities too, that are distinct from our neighbors, that we can say that so much of our attention is, I feel like we have attention to focus on our own business. Like as me, like if I'm an individual and I have my own life, my own responsibilities, my own life to be responsible for, and yet there's so much of my energy is like getting siphoned off, right, by this drama that doesn't have anything to do with me personally, and I could have, days, weeks where instead of taking action to make my own experience of life a better, less, how do I make my life less miserable and upsetting, and I could spend all this time trying to understand what the hell is going on with American politics, only to try to incorporate that into an astrology video that gets 0 views, 0 likes, 0 subscribers, 0 business, and all I get is upset, basically. Upset over a political situation that, regardless of what my opinion is, I have no influence over, and yet, you know what I'm saying? It's like, there's at least there's a sense, that there is a sense, though, that the relief of this, there's a certain relief that comes from the fact that at least I live in a different country, the United States. At least everything that's going on there does not apply to me. Of course, there are knock-on effects. There could be some sort of economic effect that if America really goes belly under, then of course Canada's economy is attached to that. We might get affected. But so far, I mean, it's a lot of me from the position of an astrologer, experiencing my life in a way that is really not affected by this, right? It's a lot of just watching the news, feeling a lot of emotions about things, and then, but really not having any I don't really know if it's actually making any tangible difference on my life or not, right? It brings me to this question, like, if I just avoided the news, if I just avoided the media entirely and just, pretended none of this stuff was happening, at what point in time would I even notice about it, right? And there's also this question about, like, is Donald Trump, are the Americans doing everything more crazy than necessary on purpose as a kind of a psychological warfare, right? Like, or trying to be just being as frustrating as possible to sort of wear people down, right? So that if you need to, like, feel like you need to turn to your addictive habits, you need, like, go back to drinking, go back to using drugs, fall off the bandwagon of your sobriety for nothing wrong going in your own personal life, but just because you're like, oh well, the world is crazy right now. What do you expect? I might as well, right? Like, there's a certain thing where it's just like you're getting this idea that what if they're doing all this stuff to intentionally piss people off, to intentionally break people down, to intentionally make people less resilient. And by trying to keep up with it, it's really like ingesting the poison into my system. And so that I am basically corrupted and poisoned by this thing that I would have been better off if I was just minding my own business, taking responsibility for my own life, and not getting involved in all this political stuff, right? But the point is, though, that if you go with that, you're just really just buying into this kind of isolationist perspective, right? That it doesn't matter if there are genocides or atrocities or vast inequalities or abuses of power anywhere else. All that matters is number one, right? It reinforces the idea of a hyper individualistic society where if you are able, like, the strongest people are those who are able to just shut off everything outside their own hyper individualistic life, and then focus that your ability for growth and ability for achievement so only on yourself, basically. And so that if there are things like injustices and unfairness and people getting screwed over, you don't even care. You're only focused on your own development, because that gives you the agency to if anything's happening in your life, good or bad, it's your responsibility. You don't have to blame anybody else for it, right? So you can take responsibility for your own life, your own success, your own failure, and you don't have to be like, what's going on with the American government, right? And so this is basically, it could be an intentional psyop or an intentional tactic to create a more and more hyper-individualistic atmosphere, right? Where people don't care about their communities, they don't care about their neighbors, they don't care about other people, they only care about themselves, they only care about their own gratification, their own success, and that this mentality creates a kind of like cold-blooded callousness to the suffering and injustices of the world. And this is playing right into the hands of people who, from that, all you care about is whether you and your family is safe. And from that, why not approve of a highly militarized, totalitarian police force, right? Because if you don't care, if anybody else suffering is none of your business, if you just have to look out for number one, then, you might as well just, if the police are on your side, then you don't care, right? And this is one of the things about, I think one of the things about Jupiter and Cancer is that there's a focus on one hand with Jupiter about the sense of divine providence, of a kind of higher principles or higher order that governs how we do everything, so that there's this kind of sense that if you can, like, if we are able to align our governments and our state and our systems so that they follow some kind of higher-minded principle, then we create a situation where it actually is easier for you to focus on your own business, because you don't have to be like, oh dear, I have to waste all this energy worrying about, like, if Like, what's the point in playing fair? What's the point in living my life with virtues and principles if the whole structure, if the whole hierarchy around me is completely corrupt and I'm just being a dumb mark? I'm just being a dumb sucker. I'm just trying to be a good guy. And then, like, there's just could be this like attitude, like you have to, like as a good parent, you have to give everything to your child. You have to self-sacrifice and nurture. Because if you don't do it, you can't count on the structure to be following those higher principles, because everything's gone completely corrupt, right? But if you have some faith that the government, that the state is operating in a higher principle, then you don't have, that takes you don't have to feel like you have to be like hyper vigilantly watching every news story that comes out, being like, how much of a shit show are we in day after day? Is it just getting worse, right? Like you can like, so that you can actually do a better job of being a parent or taking care of your own job or taking care of your own responsibility, because there isn't like this demand to be like, to constantly watch society fall apart, the collapse, basically, right? But we don't have that guarantee, unfortunately. We don't have that guarantee. So what we end up in a situation where people's attention is fragmented, it's divided, it's like you don't feel like you can be a good parent, or you don't feel like you can be a good job, because when you're supposed to be thinking about one thing, you're thinking about another thing. This is kind of like, I think this is basically what I'm trying to get at with the Jupiter in Gemini moving into Jupiter in Cancer, is that you could be going from an abundance that comes from a narrowing of focus, but it's a narrowing of focus that is into what is your dominion, right? What is for you and yours, or that expression when people say like, not my circus, not my monkeys, right? There could be this kind of attitude with the whole political thing going on, at least from a Canadian perspective, that I can relax about it, because it's not my circus, not my monkeys. I voted, I elected Mark Carney. I'm happy about that, at least. I don't really know what else to say. But in terms of political involvement, at least I can sort of withdraw my attention from being divided. Like, it's like the shepherd and his sheep, right? That when you're a shepherd and you've got a number of sheep and some are missing, you gotta say, look, where's the sheep? Are the sheep run off? Is the sheep running off to pay attention to stuff that's really not my business, right? And there's other things. I mean, you may notice that some other astrologers are talking a lot about things like UFOs, UAPs, stuff like that. I saw something in the sky once, but I'm pretty sure it was just space junk, right? I'm pretty sure I saw some space junk burning up in the stratosphere. I've never seen a UFO. I've never seen an alien. And yet I have collaborated with other astrologers who claim to have met the aliens, right? And it's like, if you've met the aliens, why do I have to buy a plane ticket to meet you at your luxury retreat? Why can't you just send the flying saucer over to give me a ride, huh? Right? So, like, it's kind of thing is like, there's this kind of thing about like, why on earth should I make it my business to care about some like X-Files extraterrestrial bullshit? I have my own, is that going to make my life any better? Probably not, right? There are, I think there's this kind of idea of knowing creativity, the creative impulse, the spirit of generosity and abundance, but within limits, right? To know that, like, it's not my job to become like a UFO expert or like a disclosure expert, or to go through all these UFO whistleblowers and try to debunk. Like, there's plenty of people. There's a crowded area anyways. I'm not going to get involved in that. Other things could be like, other issues could be like, trying to create highly viral content using AI, as if there's not enough brain rot in the world already, right? I think there's probably too much brain rot. And so to make you can make these clear cuts, right? These clear borders, reinforcing the boundaries that Dan's Astrology is not a brain rot channel. It's not a UFO speculation channel. It's not a doomer AI channel. It's a channel of God honest astrology, you know, and to help to reaffirm the boundaries of where you're working in, so that I can show up and I can produce astrology videos with a degree of attention and focus and concentration that I'm going to be delivering to you the top-notch astrology content. And it's not that I'm not a strict skeptic or it's not like I'm just going to leave it to some other people. If you want me to debunk the whole UFO phenomenon, there'll be other people that'll do a better job for that. If you want some quality astrology, I'll be the guy for you. Okay, thanks for watching. Tune in next time. All right.